Rainbow Magic, Selena the Sleepover Fairy. Story 1. The Magical Sleeping Bag. I can't believe we're going to a sleepover on the National Museum, said Rachel Walker to her best friend, Kirsty Tate, as a couch rumbled down the motorway. I can't wait. It's going to be so cool. Two best friends were among 30 children taking part in a school sleepover, and everybody was super excited. After a while, the coach began to slow down. We'll stop here for 20 minutes, began Mr. Ferguson, one of the teachers in charge. So keep an eye in your watches. The service station was hidden from the motorway by the line of trees. As Rachel looked at them, something sparkled among the leaves. That looks like fairy dust, she said. The girls were friends with the fairies and often helped out when mischievous Jack Frost caused them trouble. As the girls rushed towards the trees, glimmering purple sparkles whizzed around them, and suddenly a fairy appeared, carrying a teddy bear. "Hello," she said in a velvety voice. "I'm Selena, the sleepover fairy." She looked worried, and the girls gasped as she gave them a warning. "Your sleepover could be at risk because of Jack Frost has done something horrible." "What do you mean?" Kirsty asked, wide-eyed. "Last night," explained Selena, we held a fairy sleepover, but Jack Frost didn't like us having fun, so he stole my 3 precious magical objects, and without them, no sleepover will go smoothly." What are your magical objects?" Rachel asked the sad-looking fairy. "The magical sleeping bag ensures everyone gets a good sleep at night's sleep," Selena began. "The enchanted games bag makes all games fun and fair, and the sleepover snack box guarantees everyone will enjoy lots of tasty food. We'll help you find them," affirmed Rachel. "And they may not be too far away," asked Kirsty, pointing across the car park. They all turned to see 6 goblins climbing out of the couch, carrying rucksacks and sleeping bags. Jack Frost had sent his goblin servants to search for the magical objects. "Those naughty goblins!" exclaimed Kirsty, as the girls watched the green mischief makers scampered into the service station, landed down with the luggage. Kirsty, Rachel, and Selena, hidden in Kirsty's hair, hurried after them. The service station was so busy it was hard to see through the crowds, but at last Rachel caught up with them. "That way," she called. As the girls continued walking, they could hear squabbling goblin voices. Get off my sleeping bag! Give it back! The goblins pushed each other crossly until one of them staggered into a machine and locked it over. The silly goblins quickly ran off, and this time the girls couldn't keep up with them. They searched everywhere, eventually exploring right at the back of the service station. The lights weren't working and it was very quiet until suddenly they heard a giggle and tiptoed around a corner. The goblins were all there, settling down inside their stolen sleeping bags. They were having a sleepover all of their own. One silly goblin had a sleeping bag that really didn't suit him. It was pink, decorated with hearts and sweets. It was glowing softly. That's my sleeping bag, said a delighted Selena. Rachel and Kirsty gasped as they stared at the magical sleeping bag. We can't get it back while it's a goblin. There's a goblin inside it, Rachel whispered. I've got an idea, said Kirsty, turning to Selena. Could you perform a spell to make it real uncomfortable? Then he might get out. Great idea, Selena smiled, waving her hand. Suddenly, the goblin wrinkled his nose. Yuck, my sleeping bag stinks of strawberries, he complained, quickly clambering out of it. Rachel and Kirsty ran towards the sleeping bag, but they weren't quick enough. The goblins realized what was happening. All jumped back together and zipped it up. Give that sleeping bag back, exclaimed Rachel. But the silly rude goblins just stuck out their tongues. All right, said Selena, waving her wand over the grinning goblins. You stay there then. Gradually, the goblins began to wriggle. It's very hot in here, said one. I can't undo the zip, complained another. That trickly fairy has magicked it shut. We're stuck. Now, began Selena, please give it back, the magical sleeping bag, and everything else you took. Then I'll give you your own sleeping bags. Kirsty bit her lips and exquisitely. I'm too hot, one goblin exclaimed. Just let me out of here. We agreed. With a wave of her wand, the hot goblins tumbled out of the bag, and with purple flash, each one had a stinky green sleeping bag under his arm. Can you magic them back to the ice castle? Kirsty whispered to Selena. I can't, she sighed as they watched the goblins running into the car park and hiding on the couch with the luggage. But I'll make sure they fall asleep and don't cause any mischief. Thank you for helping me today. Selena magicked the sleeping bag back to the fairy size, then sent all the ordinary sleeping bags and rucksacks safely back to the school couch. Selena fluttered around the whir of the violet sparkles. I'll be back when I've returned the magic sleeping bag to fairyland. She smiled at the girls. After all, we still have to find my other two magical objects. We'll help, Rachel promised with a big smile. As the little fairy disappeared, Kirsty looked at her watch. Oh no, she said, grabbing Rachel's arm. We've got to get back to the car park. They quickly ran towards the couch, climbed out on the board, and dropped into their seats, panting and giggling. Just in time, girls, smiled Mr. Ferguson. Next stop, the National Museum. Story 2, The Enchanted Games Bag. As the coach rolled along, heading for the museum, Rachel and Kirsty wondered if Selena would be there to meet them. They couldn't wait to see their fairy friend again. When they arrived at the museum a little later, everyone eagerly filled off the couch. Then they were crowded and chattering. Excited children everywhere. Right, everybody, said Mr. Ferguson. Take your things off the luggage hold and line up in pairs. Oh, Kirsty, Rachel exclaimed. We have to get to the luggage quickly and check that goblins aren't up to mischief. It seemed to take forever until the children in front of them had collected their bags. At last it was their turn. Here are our things, whispered Rachel, peering inside the luggage hold. But there are no goblins. Selena's spell made goblins sleep, but they must have got out when the bus stopped, said Kirsty. Everyone walked to the museum, and for the moment the goblins were forgotten. Good evening, said a smiling lady. I'm Charlotte, and you are going to be in the purple group. Rachel and Kirsty listened carefully as Charlotte told them about the treasure hunt. Each group must follow rules to find a letter of the alphabet, she explained. When the letters are put together, they will spell out a place into the museum. That's where the midnight feast storytelling will be held. Then Charlotte gave them each a purple cap. The Enchanted Games bag is missing, Kirsty whispered to Rachel as they dropped out their bags. Without the treasure hunt, we'll go wrong. They followed Charlotte to the Roman gallery, where she handed an envelope to each pair of children. Good luck finding missing letter, she smiled. Kirsty opened the envelope and read out their clue. Harder than glasses and richer than crowns. You'll find me fingers fabulous grounds. Diamonds are harder than glasses, Kirsty whispered. Yes, said Rachel, but there are no diamonds in there. Rachel frowned, looking around. I think something's wrong with the clues. Look, said Kirsty suddenly, pointing to Roman vase nearby. It's glowing. Suddenly, Selena zoomed out of it, and the girls crouched down at the side, out of the sight. I've seen the Enchanted Games bag, rushed Tiny Fairy. A boy wearing a red cap had it. One of the goblins must have dropped it, said Rachel thoughtfully, and the boy picked it up. Suddenly, they spotted some very short rushing past the door. A goblin! Cried Kirsty. Let's follow him, said Rachel. Selena waved her wand, and the girls were caught in the whirl of tiny stars and shrank to fairy size. They zoomed out of the gallery and glimpsed through the goblin running down the main staircase. They flew closely behind him, and when they reached at the bottom, they saw 6 goblins messing around behind the reservation desk. Selena and the girls hid behind the dinosaur model and watched as the goblin they had been following rushed to the desk. I can't find the pesky human child who picked up the fairy bag, he said. We'll all come and look, sighed another. We must find that boy before the goblins do, said Selena in an argument whisper. 3 fairies started down a long corridor, peering closely as everyone. But nobody was carrying anything like looked magical. Then Rachel noticed a boy standing beside a long dinosaur model. He was carrying a bag. As she watched, she noticed that was glowing strongly. Look, Selena said. The Enchanted Games bag must be inside. But before they could decide what to do, a goblin leaned down from the dinosaur and dipped his hand into the unzipped bag. Luckily, just then the boy strode out of the gallery with the goblins scurrying after him and the fairies fluttering above. Next, the boy paused beside a model of the polar bear, and the girls watched as 2 goblins scrambled up its back. Realizing what they were going to do, Selena swept her wand over Rachel and Kirsty's heads to make them human-sized again. Girls, she whispered to Rachel and Kirsty, who saw what was happening just in the time, and shouted to the boy, Look out! The boy whimped around, and the goblin landed on the ground with a furious squawk. Give me that bag now, he demanded rudely. The boy looked angry. I found it, so it's finders keepers, he reported. Excuse me, said Rachel. Oh, hello, the boy said, turning around to face Rachel and Kirsty. Thank you for warning me. You're welcome, she replied. You see, we've been looking for you too. I think you got our friend's back, and she really needs us back. The boy stared at them thoughtfully and then looked at the green-hat goblin skulling nearby. This boy's been trying to take it from me, too. It must be very special. it is, said Kirsty gently. The boy reached into his travel bag and drew out the games pack. Smiling broadly, he held it to Rachel. The goblin snorted with rage. As the boy said goodbye and headed back to find his group, Selena hovered in front of the girls and flicked off her wand and the enchanted game bag returned to fairy sides, and she smiled at Rachel and Kirsty. Thank you for prodding him to give back the magical bag, she said. You're welcome, replied Rachel. Are you talking it to the fairyland? Yes, Selena said, but I'll be back. We'll still have the sleepover snack box to find. As the little fairy disappeared in a flurry of pinky purple dust, Rachel and Kirsty wandered back to the Roman gallery. When they arrived, Mr. Ferguson was looking very pleased. Charlotte has found some brand new sets of clues, he told them. Now that everything was back to normal, the group set off on their treasure hunts again. Altogether, they found 5 letters. Everyone gathered in the entrance hall and studied the letters together. Who will be first to put the letters on the right order? Charlotte asked. It spells "crypt," called a boy who had found the enchanted games back. Correct, said Charlotte, sounding impressed. Rachel and Kirsty looked at each other. A midnight feast in a crypt? How exciting! Story 3, The Sleepover Snack Box. Charlotte handed each of the children a glass lantern, and in the dark in the crypt, she smiled. There were lots of gasps and giggles, and they followed Charlotte down a winding staircase. It grew colder and darker as they traveled deeper underground. At least they reached an old wooden door. Charlotte rushed it open. It gave a loud creak and they faced a long passageway. This is where we keep all the exhibits that aren't being used, Charlotte said. In the dim lights from the lanterns, the girls saw mysterious boxes and tall vases. There are lots of strange shapes covered in white sheets. The long snake of children ran through more dusty passages until they found themselves in a big room. A man was sitting smiling on an ornate chair. This is Jack, the storyteller, Charlotte explained to everyone as the children moved towards him. Charlotte peered behind the curtain and Rachel and Kirsty caught a glimpse of a long empty wooden table. Charlotte looked worried as she hurried over to Jack. There's a bit of problem, they heard her say. The feast isn't ready. Could you start the story while I go and sort it out? This must be because the sleepover snack box is still missing, whispered Rachel. Welcome to the crypt, said Jack in a rich, warm voice. Rachel started listening to the story, but Kirsty was distracted. She kept thinking someone was behind her. Eventually, she turned her head and saw a spiky headed shadow. She quickly nudged Rachel, but the strange shadow had completely disappeared. Maybe it was the lantern lights making funny shapes on the wall, Rachel suggested. Looking at her own lantern, she gasped. It was shining very brightly, and suddenly Selena, the sleepover fairy, shut out. I have news, she said. Jack Frost is so fed up with the silly goblins losing everything, he's taking the sleepover snack box to himself. I think it's here, whispered Kirsty. I just saw his shadow. He's searching for the goblins, Selena released. We have to find him, whispered Rachel argumently. And the sleepover snack box, said Kirsty. The girls looked around. Jack was well on his story now, and everyone's attention was on him. They crept after Selena into a far corner, and the fairy waved a tiny wand. There was a faint musical sound, and the girls shrank to fairy size along with their lanterns. We must, like tiny fireflies, giggled Rachel as they rose up into the air, flying close together, and three friends made their way down a long, dark passage. Suddenly they heard a crash and a loud squawk. It sounded like a goblin, cried Selena, as the fairies' eyes got used to the dim light. They saw that a jumble of packing boxes had toppled into two goblins. A large one was rubbing a large red bump on his head. The other was rubbing his foot. Shh, said the third. Do you want Jack Frost to hear us? You said there was going to be a wonderful midnight feast, but it's cold and dark. And I'm hungry, grumbled the first goblin angrily. Come on, whispered Selena. Jack Frost not here. Let's look somewhere else. They flew back along the tunnel and out of the main room. Suddenly, Rachel gave the cry. Look, she whispered, pointing. Jack Frost was skulling in the shadows, carrying a sleepover snack box under his arm. We have to get him away from this other children, said Kirsty. They would really scared if they spotted him. Why is he just standing there? Said Selena. I think he wants to hear Jack's story, said Rachel. I've got an idea, said Kirsty to Selena. Could you use your magic to make us voices sound like goblins? Then Jack Frost might follow us. Selena waved her hand and the girls swooped down. "Solio, Jack Frost," said Rachel, giggling like a goblin. Jack Frost's head whipped around, but of course he couldn't see any goblins. The girls zoomed into tunnel entrance. "Over there," teased Kirsty, waving her arms in the air just as Jack reached a very spooky part of his story. The light from Rachel's lantern cast Kirsty's shadow in the wall, making it huge and monstrous. Jack Frost gave a cry, dropped the box, and ran away. His terrified scream was so loud, the goblins heard it and thought it was a ghost. They scampered out of the tunnel after him. "Thank goodness," said Rachel with a smile. "Jack Frost and the goblins have gone, and we've found a sleepover snack box." "You've been wonderful, girls," said Selena, hugging them tightly. "I'm so happy to have all my magical objects back where they belong." Selena transformed the sleepover snack box to a fairy size with a touch of her sparkling wand. Kirsty and Rachel gave her a big smile. Then the fairy made the two girls human size again. "It's nice to have my own voice back," laughed Kirsty. "Goodbye and thank you," said Selena with a beaming smile. A air filled with a shimmering golden fairy dust, and Selena was gone. The girls slipped back into the hall just as the story ended, and the Charlotte appeared with trays of delicious smelling food. There were bowls of yummy strawberries and massive iced cupcakes. After the feast, Charlotte announced it was time for bed, but everyone were groans from everyone. After the game, hide and seek, of course, Charlotte said with a laugh, "I'm glad we found the magical objects in time." Rachel said, "Now we can enjoy the rest of the sleepover." Now it's the perfect and just truly magical adventures.